The Duke of Kestrel Chase, Gideon Vaughan, returned to England on a tide of grey sea and colder memory. He had been away 5 years, 5 years of cannon smoke and hard ground and the brittle correspondence of war. He came back not to reclaim a life, but to dismantle one. His first and only order of business was to sell the estate, that great stone mausoleum of his family's legacy, and be done with it. He had arranged the meeting with the estate steward for 9 in the morning. By 10, not a single tenant farmer had appeared. By 11, the steward, a man named Ellery with a face like worried parchment, could only stammer apologies. Gideon stood by the long, dust-filmed window of the study, looking out over the overgrown lawns. They were summoned. Are they defiant? His voice was flat, a tool sharpened by years of command. It held no heat, only a chilling expectation of being obeyed. "No, Your Grace," Ellery said, wringing his hands. "Not defiant. It is a condition. They have a condition." Gideon turned slowly. His gaze was unnervingly direct. "A condition for paying their duke the courtesy of a meeting." The steward swallowed. "They say they will not speak of the estate's business with anyone. Not without her." A flicker of something, annoyance, confusion, crossed the duke's stoic features. Her? Who is her? Ellery looked at the floor, at the ceiling, at the portrait of Gideon's grim-faced grandfather, anywhere but at the Duke himself. "The Duchess, Your Grace." The words hung in the stale air. The Duchess. Gideon had not thought of that title, of the woman attached to it, in years. He remembered the ceremony only in fragments, the scent of cold stone in the chapel, the rustle of a borrowed silk gown, the pale, serious face of a young woman he had met twice before, Constance Bellamy. A sensible arrangement, his solicitor had called it, a bride with a respectable name but no dowry, who would keep the title within the family line while he went to war. He had signed the register, given a clipped nod, and departed for the continent the following dawn. He had left her in the care of his aunt, Lady Honora Fenwick, with a generous allowance for the household. He had done his duty. He had not given her another thought. "The tenants will speak only to my wife?" Gideon repeated, the word wife feeling foreign on his tongue. "Yes, Your Grace. They say she is the one who knows the fields. She is the one who knows their families. They will not discuss rents or repairs or the future of their homes without her." A muscle worked in Gideon's jaw. This was an unforeseen complication, a sentimental rebellion. He had pictured a swift, clean transaction: sell the land, the house, the title if he could, and take the funds to build a new life somewhere warmer, somewhere without ghosts. He had not accounted for a quiet, absent woman holding the loyalty of an entire estate. "Then fetch her," he commanded. "Fetch the Duchess." But the Duchess was not in the drawing-room, nor in the morning-room, nor any of the grand, cold chambers of Kestrel Chase. A housemaid, a young girl named Tilly with frightened eyes, finally directed him toward the back of the house, past the kitchens and the scullery, to a small, cramped room that had once been used for sorting seeds. There, at a simple wooden desk piled high with ledgers, sat Constance. She was no longer the waif-like girl from the chapel. At 24, her face had settled into a quiet gravity. Her brown hair was pinned back in a severe but practical knot. Her dress was of a plain, dark wool, impeccably clean but visibly mended at the cuff. She did not look like a duchess. She looked like a clerk. She was writing, her hand moving with a steady, practiced grace across a page of figures. She did not look up when he entered. The room smelled of ink, old paper, and faintly of rosemary. A single candle burned on the desk, though it was midday, for the room's only window was small and faced a high stone wall. For 5 years, this had been her world. Not the silks and society his allowance should have afforded, but this cramped, shadowed space. "They tell me the tenants will not speak to me," Gideon said, his voice filling the small room. Constance finished her line of figures, blotted the ink with a small sandbox, and only then did she lift her head. Her eyes were a clear, steady gray. There was no surprise in them, no fear, no welcome, only a calm, unnerving neutrality. "That is correct," she said. Her voice was as he remembered it, low and even. "They refer to you as the Duchess." A faint, almost imperceptible irony touched her lips. "It is my title, though I have had little use for it within these walls." He saw it then, the threadbare rug, the single, straight-backed chair she occupied, the way the ledgers were not household accounts, but the detailed records of the entire estate. Rents, yields, repairs, births, deaths. This was not the work of a duchess of leisure. This was the work of a steward, a bailiff, a secretary. This was invisible labor, performed in a forgotten room. "My aunt, Lady Honora, where is she?" he asked, a new, colder question forming in his mind. "Lady Honora is in residence," Constance replied. "She manages the household finances, the allowance you provide." She said nothing more, but the implication was as clear as the worn fabric of her sleeve. The generous allowance never reached this room. It never reached the tenants. It stopped with Lady Honora. Gideon looked from the meticulous ledgers to the woman who had compiled them. He had returned to sell a property. He was beginning to suspect he had returned to a battlefield he hadn't known existed. And this quiet woman was its sole, unacknowledged defender. He had left a bride. He had found a guardian. And she was the key to everything. "The tenants are waiting," she said, her gaze unwavering. "Shall we go and speak to them?" It was not a question. It was a summons. And for the first time in 5 years, Gideon Vaughan, Duke of Kestrel Chase, found himself following an order he had not given. He had come to issue commands and liquidate his past. Instead, he was being led into it by a woman he had married and abandoned, a woman who held the one thing he could not command: trust. The sale of Kestrel Chase, he realized with a grim certainty, would not be simple at all. Lady Honora Fenwick swept into the drawing room like a galleon under full sail, all rustling silk and the scent of expensive French perfume. She was a handsome woman in her 50s, with Gideon's family features sharpened by a lifetime of social ambition. She greeted her nephew with a theatrical cry of affection, her hands fluttering to his uniformed shoulders. "Gideon, my dear boy, returned at last, a conquering hero." Her eyes, however, were sharp and calculating as they swept over him, assessing the man who had replaced the boy she remembered. "Aunt," he said, his tone clipped. He did not return the embrace. "I trust you are well as can be expected, managing this great, drafty pile in your absence," she said with a put-upon sigh. "But we have kept things in order, of course, for your return." At that moment, Constance entered the room. She had not changed her dress. She simply stood by the door, a silent, unobtrusive presence. Lady Honora's smile tightened. "Constance, you are hovering. The Duke and I have family matters to discuss." The dismissal was swift and contemptuous. It was clear this was a dynamic rehearsed 1,000 times over 5 years. "Constance is here at my request," Gideon stated flatly. He gestured to a chair. "She will be part of this discussion." A flicker of surprise, then irritation, it with a brittle laugh. "Of course, dear. If you wish to indulge her. She has her little hobbies, you know. The accounts." She said the word accounts as if it were a slightly embarrassing ailment. "I wish to see those accounts," Gideon said. "All of them. For the last 5 years." Lady Honora's composure was flawless. "Certainly, I have them right here, though I fear they will not make for pleasant reading. The land is poor, the tenants are lazy, and the harvests have been abysmal. The estate is a drain, Gideon. You are wise to sell." She produced a slim leather-bound ledger from a side table. It was elegant, the paper thick and creamy. Gideon opened it. The figures were written in a flowing, fashionable hand, and they told a story of unrelenting decline. Losses year after year, repairs deferred, rents in arrears. According to this book, Kestrel Chase was on the brink of insolvency. Gideon turned a page. His finger stopped on a line item. "The North Pasture, rented to Farmer Corbett. The rent listed here is £2 per annum." "He is an old man. We are lenient," Lady Honora said smoothly. Gideon looked at Constance. He asked her a direct question, cutting through the social performance. "What is the true rent for the North Pasture?" Constance met his gaze. Her voice was quiet, but clear as a bell. "Farmer Corbett pays £8 per annum in quarterly installments. He has not been late with a payment in 20 years. His wife, Suki, delivers it herself." The silence in the room was sudden and absolute. Lady Honora's face, for the first time, lost its carefully applied warmth. A flush crept up her neck. "The girl is mistaken. She plays with numbers she doesn't understand." Gideon ignored her. He continued to look at Constance. "And the repairs to the mill? This ledger shows a cost of £200 last spring." "The mill wheel broke," Constance said. "I procured the timber from our own woods. The village blacksmith, Hobb, and his son made the repairs. The cost was £17 for the iron fittings and their labor. I have the receipt in my office." Every statement was a quiet, devastating hammer blow to the fiction his aunt had constructed. Gideon closed the elegant, false ledger and placed it on the table with a soft thud that echoed like a gunshot. He had seen this kind of deception before, in the quartermaster's tents. Skimmed supplies, padded invoices. It was the quiet, grubbing rot that could cripple an army as surely as a cannonade. He had not expected to find it in his own home, perpetrated by his own blood. "Where are the real ledgers?" he asked Constance, his voice dangerously low. "In my office," she replied. "Hidden." "Hidden from whom?" "From anyone who might wish for them to tell a different story," she said, her gaze flicking for a fraction of a second toward Lady Honora. He had heard enough. He felt a cold, familiar anger rising in him, the kind that preceded a decisive action. He had been a fool. A distant, negligent fool who had signed a paper and walked away, leaving this quiet, steady woman to face down the avarice of his own family. He had thought her an encumbrance, a detail in the disposal of his property. He saw now that she was the only thing of value left in the entire God-forsaken house. He stood up. "Lady Honora, you will retire to your rooms. You will not speak to any member of the staff. You will not leave Kestrel Chase. We will discuss the matter of your management at a later time. His aunt's face was a mask of fury and indignation. How dare you? I am your father's sister. This is my home. It is my home, Gideon corrected her, his voice like ice. And you are a guest here. A guest whose welcome is wearing exceedingly thin. He turned his back on her, a dismissal more profound than any shout. He faced Constance. "Show me," he said. "Show me everything." Together, they walked out of the opulent, deceitful drawing room and back toward the cramped, honest space where the truth of Kestrel Chase had been painstakingly preserved. It was not an alliance he had sought, but it was one he now desperately needed. He could not sell the estate, not yet. First, he had to understand what, precisely, he owned. And it was clear that the only person who could tell him was the wife he had all but forgotten. The estate office was a revelation. It was small and poorly lit, but inside it was a fortress of order. On rough-hewn shelves, Constance had stored dozens of simple, sturdy ledgers, each one neatly labeled by year and quarter. She had cross-referenced them with bundles of receipts tied with twine, letters from tenants, and hand-drawn maps of the fields showing crop rotations. It was 5 years of meticulous, secret stewardship. Gideon pulled one of the ledgers from the shelf. The handwriting was the same as the script he'd seen earlier, precise, clear, and economical. But the story these numbers told was entirely different. Kestrel Chase was not failing. It was solvent, modestly profitable even. The profits were not large, but they were consistent. Every penny of rent was accounted for. Every shilling of expenditure was justified with a corresponding receipt. And next to each entry of profit, there was another, fainter entry in a separate column. A calculation. "What is this?" Gideon asked, pointing to the secondary column. "That is the amount Lady Honora reported to you in her letters," Constance said. "And this," she pointed to another set of figures, "is the difference. The amount she transferred each quarter to her personal account in London." Gideon stared at the numbers. The theft was breathtaking in its audacity. Over 5 years, his aunt had siphoned away nearly £7,000. A fortune. Enough to fund her lavish gowns, her French perfumes, and her entire life of perceived gentility, all while the estate and the woman who ran it were starved of funds. "She told me the tenants were behind on their rents," he said, his voice rough. "No tenant is behind," Constance stated. "Except for the widow at Marrowdean Cottage. Her son has been ill. I told her we would defer until the boy is well. Her husband served your father for 40 years. It is a matter of respect." He looked at her, truly looked at her, for the first time since his return. He saw the intelligence in her clear gray eyes, the strength in the set of her jaw. She was not asking for his pity. She was not complaining of her treatment. She was simply presenting the facts. It was not pity, he felt. It was something harder and more respectful. It was admiration. "I cannot sell this estate," he said, more to himself than to her. "Not like this. The books are a disaster. The legal ownership of the funds is a tangled mess." "Yes," she agreed. "I need to unravel it. I need to present a clear accounting to any potential buyer. I need to reclaim the stolen funds from my aunt."
He paused, the strategic part of his mind taking over. "I cannot do it alone. I need your help." He expected her to agree immediately. He expected relief or even a hint of triumph. He saw neither. She simply regarded him with that unnerving calm. "Why should I help you sell Kestrel Chase?" she asked. The question caught him off guard. "I will see you are provided for, handsomely, 1/3 of the final sale price. It will be a binding legal document. You will be a wealthy woman. You will be free." "I am not interested in wealth," she said plainly. "And I have a different definition of freedom." She walked to the small, grimy window and looked out at the stone wall. "For 5 years, these people, the tenants, have been my responsibility. They have trusted me. When the roof of the cooperage failed, we repaired it together. When the blight struck the potatoes in the lower fields, we worked out a new planting schedule. They are not just names in a ledger to me, Your Grace. They are families. If you sell this land to the highest bidder, what happens to them? To Farmer Corbett? To the widow at Marrowdean?"
A new owner might see them as inefficient. He might raise rents. He might evict them to create larger, more profitable sheep runs. She turned back to him, her hands clasped before her. "I will help you. I will help you untangle the finances and restore order to this estate. But not so you can sell it to the first man with a full purse. I will help you on one condition." "Name it," he said, intrigued by her fire. "That any offer for this estate must be conditional upon the fair treatment of the tenants. No evictions for 5 years. Rents frozen at their current rates for the same period. Their homes, their livelihoods must be secured. That is my price." Gideon was silent for a long moment. It was an absurd business proposition. It would lower the value of the estate considerably. It was sentimental and impractical. And yet, it was also a matter of honor. The honor she had upheld in his absence. "You ask a great deal," he said. "I ask for loyalty to be repaid with loyalty," she countered. "It is what you would do for your men in the field. These are your people. Or have you been away so long you have forgotten that?" He had. He had forgotten. He had reduced them all to assets and liabilities on a balance sheet. She was reminding him they were human beings, with lives intertwined with this soil. She was holding him to a standard he had long since abandoned for himself. He gave a short, decisive nod. "Very well. Your condition is accepted. We will secure the tenants' futures. Together." He held out his hand. It was not a gesture of romance, but of contract. A soldier's pact. Constance looked at his hand, then up at his face. For a fraction of a second, he saw a flicker of another emotion in her eyes. Weariness, perhaps, or a deep, abiding sorrow. Then it was gone, replaced by the same steady resolve. She placed her hand in his. Her skin was cool, her grip surprisingly firm. "Together," she agreed. The word hung between them, a fragile bridge across 5 years of silence and neglect. It was the beginning of their reluctant alliance, a partnership forged in a dusty room over a shared purpose. He needed her knowledge. She needed his power. And as their work began, neither of them could possibly imagine how that simple, practical arrangement would slowly, irrevocably, transform them both. Their days settled into a strange, quiet rhythm. By morning, they worked side by side in the small office, sifting through the years of deception. Gideon, with his military precision, organized the evidence, while Constance provided the context, the human story behind each number. He learned the name of every tenant, every child, every fallow field and struggling copse. He learned of her small, clever innovations, the introduction of clover to replenish the soil in the west fields, the planting of a willow brake to stop the creek from flooding the water meadows. Kestrel Chase, he discovered, was not just a parcel of land. It was a complex, living organism, and Constance knew its every vein and artery. In the afternoons, they would often walk the estate. Gideon had intended these walks as inspections, a way to verify the ledgers against the reality of the land. But they became something more. He saw the respect in the tenants' eyes when they looked at Constance. They would tip their hats to him, the Duke, but they would smile at her. An old farmer, Tam, would stop her to show her a prize-winning squash. A young mother would thank her for the herbal tonic that had soothed her baby's colic. Gideon watched it all in silence. He saw how she moved through this world she had quietly built. She never raised her voice, never gave a direct order. She would suggest, inquire, and listen. Her authority was earned, not imposed. It was a form of leadership he had never encountered, and it fascinated him. One afternoon, they were inspecting the old stone wall that bordered the east pasture. A section had collapsed during a winter storm.
My aunt's ledger shows a payment of £50 to a stonemason from Marley to repair this, Gideon said, consulting a small notebook.
Constance ran her hand over the cold, moss-covered stones. No mason ever came. The day after the storm, I came out with Jem and Perkin, the two youngest sons from Hilltop Farm. We spent 2 days rebuilding it ourselves. They are good lads, strong backs. She smiled faintly. The cost was a hot meat pie and 2 shillings each for their trouble. Gideon looked at the wall. It was solid, well built. Then he looked at her hands. They were not the soft, pale hands of a duchess. Her knuckles were slightly red, her nails short and practical. He saw a small, faded scar near her thumb. He had an abrupt, vivid image of her lifting these heavy stones, her face determined, her hands raw. "Who did that to you?" he asked, his voice unexpectedly rough. He gestured toward the scar. She glanced down, surprised by the personal question. "Oh, it is nothing. A slip of the shears in my garden." "Your garden?" She hesitated, then led him around a corner of the old kitchens to a small, sheltered patch of land he had never noticed before. It was a jewel box of a garden, meticulously tended. There were rows of herbs, rosemary, thyme, lavender, sage, and hardy vegetables. But at its center, there was a single, magnificent rose bush, covered in deep crimson blossoms. It was a vibrant splash of life against the gray stone of the house. "The main gardens were left to go wild," she explained, a hint of apology in her tone. "Lady Honora did not see the point in paying gardeners. This was manageable." He understood. This small plot was her sanctuary, the one place where she could cultivate beauty and order for herself. It was the physical manifestation of her own resilience. He looked from the thriving garden to the neglected grandeur of the main estate. The contrast was stark. That evening, a package arrived for him from London. It contained the military dispatches and letters that had been held for him during his journey home. He sorted through them disinterestedly until he came upon a bundle of letters from Kestrel Chase. They were all from his aunt, written on her expensive, perfumed stationery. He read one, then another. They were filled with complaints about the estate, the weather, the insolence of the tenants, and sprinkled throughout were casual, cruel mentions of Constance.
Your bride keeps to her rooms, a sullen, ungrateful creature. She has no conversation and no interest in managing the household, which of course all falls to me. Another read, I attempted to introduce Constance to some local society, but she is hopelessly plain and awkward. She shames the title. It is best she remains unseen. He crumpled the letter in his fist. For 5 years he had accepted this narrative. He had pictured Constance as a quiet, perhaps simple-minded girl, content to be ignored. He had never once questioned his aunt's version of events. Why would he? He had wanted the arrangement to be simple, and his aunt's letters had made it so. He had not received a single letter from Constance herself, which he had taken as confirmation of her disinterest. Now, a terrible suspicion bloomed in his mind. He thought of her precise handwriting, her articulate speech, her sharp intellect. The woman described in these letters did not exist. He found her in the library, a room they had begun to reclaim from its dusty slumber. She was standing by a window, watching the rain streak down the glass. "Did you ever write to me?" he asked without preamble. She turned. There was a flicker of old pain in her eyes before she masked it. "Yes," she said. "Twice. In the first year." "I never received any letters from you." "I know," she said softly. "After the second one was returned to me, its seal broken, with a note from Lady Honora explaining that the Duke was not to be troubled with domestic trifles, I understood. So I stopped writing." The quiet dignity of her admission was more damning than any accusation. His aunt had not only stolen his money, she had stolen his wife's voice. She had deliberately and methodically isolated Constance, ensuring he would never know the woman he had married. He felt a surge of cold fury. But beneath it, something else. A deep, aching shame. He had been complicit in her erasure. His silence, his distance, his willful ignorance had been the cage bars. He took a step closer. He wanted to say something, to apologize, but the words felt hollow, inadequate. Instead, he simply said, "She was wrong." Constance looked at him, a question in her eyes. "You are not a trifle," he said, his voice low and intense. "And I should have been troubled." It was the closest he had ever come to an apology. In the quiet, rain-lashed library, with the ghosts of 5 years of lies between them, a subtle shift occurred. The transactional nature of their alliance began to fray at the edges, revealing something more fragile and infinitely more complex beneath. He was no longer just seeing her competence. He was beginning to see her. And he was starting to understand the profound depth of the injustice that had been done, not just to his estate, but to his wife. The desire to sell Kestrel Chase was fading, replaced by a new, more urgent mission: to see justice done. The first sign of the coming storm was the arrival of Mr. Malcolm Sinclair. He came in a polished black carriage, a man as sleek and well-appointed as his vehicle. He was handsome, in a way that seemed calculated, with a ready smile that did not reach his eyes. He was the prospective buyer Lady Honora had been corresponding with before Gideon's return, a wealthy industrialist from the north looking to purchase a title and a pedigree. He greeted Gideon with an air of conspiratorial bonhomie, as if they were two sensible men of business who could dispense with sentimentality. "A fine property, Your Grace," he said, his eyes scanning the grand, faded drawing room. "A bit worn around the edges, but the bones are good. Nothing a bit of capital can't fix." His gaze fell upon Constance, who had entered to bring them tea. He gave her a dismissive glance, the kind one gives a servant. "Your housekeeper, I presume?" "This is my wife, the Duchess," Gideon said, his voice devoid of warmth. Sinclair's smile faltered for a second. He recovered quickly, bowing with a flourish. "Your Grace, a pleasure. Forgive me. Lady Honora's letters led me to believe you were unwell." "I am quite well, thank you," Constance replied, her tone even. The air in the room was thick with unspoken currents. Sinclair directed all his conversation to Gideon, discussing land values, timber rights, and the potential for sheep grazing on a grander scale. He spoke of the tenants as if they were interchangeable units of labor, to be managed or replaced as profitability dictated. With every word, Gideon felt a growing dislike for the man. He represented everything Constance had feared. Lady Honora, who had been confined to her rooms but not to silence, had clearly found an ally in Sinclair. She emerged for dinner that evening, dressed in her finest silks, her demeanor restored to its former imperious glory. She and Sinclair dominated the conversation, sharing anecdotes about London society and subtly undermining Constance at every turn. "Constance has such simple tastes," Lady Honora would say with a thin smile. "She prefers her ledgers to a lively dinner party."
"A practical mind is a fine thing in its place," Sinclair would add smoothly. "But a great house requires a lady with vision, with an eye for beauty and society." Constance endured it all with her usual unshakable composure, speaking only when spoken to, her face a mask of polite neutrality. But Gideon saw the tension in her shoulders, the way she held her fork a little too tightly.
He found himself wanting to defend her, to silence them, but he knew a public confrontation would be a mistake. This was a different kind of battle, one fought with whispers and insinuations. The whispers began in the village of Marley a few days later. Rumors carried on the wind like poison dust. The Duchess, it was said, was the reason for the estate's decline. She was hoarding money, refusing necessary repairs, squeezing the tenants for every last penny, all to make the estate seem worthless so the Duke wouldn't sell it. It was a twisted, inverted version of the truth, cleverly designed to turn the tenants against her. Gideon heard it from his valet, who had heard it from the publican. The loyalty Constance had spent 5 years building was being deliberately eroded. "It is Sinclair and my aunt," Gideon said to her that night in the office. "They are trying to isolate you." "I know," she said, her face pale in the candlelight. "Hannah, the housekeeper, told me. Some of the women in the village averted their eyes from her at the market today. The loyalty of the staff, at least, remained firm. Hannah, a gruff woman who had served the Vaughan family for 30 years, had seen Lady Honora's casual cruelty to Constance for years. She and the few other long-serving members of the household had become Constance's silent supporters, their approval shown in small acts: an extra log for the fire in her office, a cup of tea left on her desk, a whispered word of warning. But the assault was escalating. It moved from gossip to a more direct attack. Gideon was in the library, reviewing a map of the estate, when Lady Honora entered, her face a picture of feigned distress. In her hand, she held a letter. "Gideon, I am so sorry to bring you this," she began, her voice trembling with manufactured sorrow. "I found it. It must have fallen from one of Constance's books." She handed him the letter. The paper was aged, the ink slightly faded. It was purportedly from Constance to a fictional cousin in Bath. And it was a confession. In flowing script, the letter detailed a plan to embezzle funds from the estate, to hide profits and falsify records. It spoke of her resentment toward the Duke and her ambition to purchase a small property of her own with the skimmed money. It was a masterpiece of forgery, filled with just enough truth to be plausible, painting her as a bitter, grasping creature. Gideon read it, his face unreadable. His mind went cold and still. This was the concrete attack, the planted evidence. "I knew she was not to be trusted," Lady Honora whispered, pressing her advantage. "A girl of no breeding, no fortune. It was inevitable she would turn on us." Gideon folded the letter slowly, deliberately. He looked at his aunt, her face alight with vicious triumph. He felt a profound, weary disgust. He had spent years in the company of men who would kill you from the front.
He found he had far less tolerance for those who stabbed you from the back, especially when they smiled while doing it. "Where is Constance?" he asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "In the garden, I believe," Lady Honora said, confident in her victory. "Poor thing. She will have to be sent away, of course, quietly, to avoid a scandal." Gideon walked out of the library, the forged letter in his hand. He did not go to the garden. He went to the small, cramped office. He knew this was the true test. Not of her, but of him. All of his old instincts, honed by years of betrayal and the harsh realities of war, screamed at him to believe the evidence in his hand. Paper and ink. A confession. But another, newer instinct, born of quiet observation and a growing respect, urged him to trust the woman. He found her there, as he knew he would be, updating a ledger. He stood in the doorway, the letter held between his fingers. The moment of crisis had arrived. Trust, a fragile seedling, was about to face the storm. We'll take a very short break. If you don't want to miss new stories, please subscribe to the channel. Constance looked up from her work, her eyes questioning as she saw the expression on his face. It was a look she had seen on him before, on the battlefield of his study, cold, assessing, guarded. But this time, it was directed at her. He did not speak. He simply walked to her desk and placed the forged letter before her. He stepped back, his arms crossed, his posture that of a judge awaiting a plea. "Explain this," he said. The two words were hard as stone. She picked up the letter. Her hands were perfectly steady. She read it through, her expression betraying nothing. The silence in the small room stretched, taut and thin. 1 second. 2. 3. Gideon watched her, every instinct on high alert. He saw no flicker of guilt, no sign of panic. He saw only a deep, focused concentration. When she finished reading, she placed the letter back on the desk. She looked not at him, but at the document itself, as if it were an interesting but flawed specimen. "It is a clever forgery," she said, her voice calm and analytical. "Is it?" he asked, his own voice tight. "Yes, but it is a forgery nonetheless." She pointed a slender finger at the page. "First, the paper. It has been artificially aged with tea. You can see the faint mottling here, near the crease. But the texture is wrong. It is too smooth. It is modern linen paper, not the rag paper I used for my correspondence 5 years ago. I still have the box." Her finger moved. "Second, the ink. It is iron gall ink, which is correct for the period. But this specific shade, with its slight bluish undertone, comes from a particular supplier in London. Mr. Sinclair uses it. I saw his signature on a document he left in the hall yesterday. My own ink is a simple black made with oak galls from our own trees." She finally lifted her eyes to his. "Third, the content. It mentions my cousin in Bath. I have no cousins in Bath. My only living relative is a second cousin in Northumberland, and we have not corresponded in a decade. And finally," she paused, a flicker of something, not anger, but a deep, weary offense crossing her features. "It says, I resent you. I have never resented you, Your Grace. I have been disappointed. I have been lonely. But I have never felt anything as useless as resentment." Her defense was flawless. It was not emotional. It was not a plea for him to believe in her goodness. It was a presentation of evidence. It was a quiet, devastating demolition of the lie built on fact, observation, and memory. She was speaking his language.
Gideon's gaze shifted from the letter to her face. He saw the unshakable integrity in her eyes, the quiet power of her composure. She did not beg for his trust. She commanded it with the simple force of the truth. In that moment, the last vestiges of his suspicion crumbled to dust. He had been given a choice: believe a well-crafted lie that confirmed his cynical worldview, or believe in the difficult, inconvenient truth of this woman's character. He made his choice. "I believe you," he said. The words were quiet, but they landed with the weight of a vow. A breath she had been holding seemed to escape her. The rigid control of her posture softened almost imperceptibly. It was the only sign of the strain she had been under. "Thank you," she whispered. "My aunt delivered this to me," he said, the pieces clicking into place. "But the ink, the phrasing, this is Sinclair's work." "They are working together," Constance agreed. "Lady Honora wants you to be rid of me. Mr. Sinclair wants to be rid of the tenant's protector. Our interests are aligned." Gideon picked up the forged letter. He looked at it now, not as an accusation, but as a weapon. Their weapon. "They have made a mistake," he said, a grim smile touching his lips for the first time. "They have provided us with the means of their own undoing. They think they have laid a private trap for you.
We will make it a public one for them." A new energy filled the room, replacing the cold tension. Their alliance, tested by doubt, had been forged into something stronger. It was no longer a reluctant pact of convenience. It was a partnership, united against a common enemy. "What do you propose?" Constance asked, her eyes alight with a new, sharp intelligence. "A formal dinner," Gideon said, his mind already moving, planning the engagement like a military campaign. "To celebrate the impending sale of Kestrel Chase. We will invite Mr. Sinclair as the guest of honor. My aunt will be there, of course. And we will have one other guest. A witness." He thought for a moment. "Mr. Solomon Jardine, the magistrate from Marley. He is a respected man, and," he added, a crucial detail surfacing from his memory of local chatter, "he is a noted amateur expert on historical documents and paper." Constance's eyes widened slightly as she understood. "You will let them spring their trap in front of him?" "Precisely," Gideon confirmed. "They wish to accuse you of forgery and theft in private. We will give them the stage to do it in public. And when they do, you will not be the one on trial." He looked at her, his partner in this strange, quiet war. The woman he had married and ignored, who had guarded his honor when he had neglected his own. "It will require courage," he said. Constance straightened her shoulders. The last hint of weariness was gone, replaced by a steely resolve. "I have the evidence," she said simply, gesturing to the rows of honest ledgers on the shelves. "And I have the truth. Courage is all that is left." The night of the dinner, Kestrel Chase was transformed. For the first time in 5 years, the grand dining hall was fully lit. The long mahogany table was polished to a gleam and set with the family's finest silver and crystal. Hannah, the housekeeper, had overseen the preparations with a grim satisfaction, understanding that this was not a celebration, but a tribunal. Mr. Sinclair arrived, exuding an air of triumph. He complimented Gideon on the rapid progress toward the sale, and treated Constance with a cloying, condescending pity, as if she were a disgraced employee about to be dismissed. Lady Honora was radiant, her victory so close she could taste it. She played the grand hostess, unaware that she was merely a player in a drama whose script she had not read. The final guest was Mr. Solomon Jardine,
a man in his late 60s with shrewd, intelligent eyes behind spectacles. He was a pillar of the local community, known for his unshakable integrity and his passion for local history. He greeted the Duke with formal respect, and the Duchess with a kind, curious warmth, having heard the conflicting rumors from the village. The first part of the dinner passed with excruciating slowness. The conversation was a brittle veneer over the seething tensions beneath. Sinclair and Lady Honora spoke of their plans for the estate, of bringing in new, more efficient tenants from the north. Gideon listened, his face an impassive mask, occasionally adding a non-committal word. Constance was silent, her composure absolute. Finally, as the port was being served, Gideon leaned back in his chair. "Mr. Sinclair," he began, his voice cutting through the chatter. "Before we proceed with the signing of any final agreements, there is a matter of some internal accounting that must be addressed." Sinclair and Lady Honora exchanged a swift, knowing glance. This was the moment. "Indeed, Your Grace," Sinclair said, his tone grave. "I am sorry to say it, but in the course of my own due diligence, I have uncovered certain financial irregularities. It appears the estate's funds have been grossly mismanaged." "Mismanaged," Gideon repeated, his eyes cold. "Or stolen?" "Stolen, I fear, is the more accurate word," Sinclair said, reaching into his breast pocket. "It pains me to present this, but I feel it is my duty. This came into my possession. It is a letter from the Duchess admitting to a long-term scheme of embezzlement." He laid the forged letter on the table between them. Mr. Jardine leaned forward, his expression shifting from polite interest to sharp concern. Lady Honora dabbed at her eyes with a lace handkerchief. "I cannot bear it," she murmured. "To be betrayed so." Gideon did not look at the letter. He looked at Constance. "Well, Constance," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the silent room. "You have been accused of theft and forgery before a magistrate. What do you have to say?" This was her moment, the culmination of 5 years of silent endurance. She rose from her chair. She was not dressed in fine silks, but in a simple, elegant gown of dark blue velvet she had sewn herself, a color that brought out the clear gray of her eyes. She looked directly at Mr. Jardine. "Mr. Jardine," she said, her voice steady and clear. "Mr. Sinclair accuses me of mismanaging this estate into ruin. I would like to present the true accounts." On her cue, Hannah entered, carrying a stack of the simple, sturdy ledgers from the office. Constance opened the first one on a side table. "These are the real accounts of Kestrel Chase, kept by me for the last 5 years. They show a modest but consistent profit. They also show, in this column here, a quarterly transfer of funds from the estate account to a private bank in London, a bank belonging to Lady Honora Fenwick." Lady Honora gasped, her face turning ashen. "Lies! She is trying to deflect!" Constance ignored her. "As for the letter," she continued, turning her attention to the document on the table, "I stated to my husband that it was a forgery. I believe you, Mr. Jardine, have some expertise in these matters. Would you do us the honor of examining it?" Intrigued, the magistrate picked up the letter. He adjusted his spectacles, holding the paper up to the candlelight. He felt its texture between his thumb and forefinger. He sniffed it. The room was utterly silent. "This is not a 5-year-old document," Mr. Jardine announced after a long moment. His voice was firm, authoritative. "The paper is modern, machine-made. It has been artificially aged, and rather clumsily at that.
The ink is also suspect. It has not had time to properly oxidize. He looked over his spectacles at Sinclair. This letter was written within the last month. It is a forgery, and a poor one at that. The magistrate's words fell like a judge's sentence. Sinclair's confident smirk vanished, replaced by a sheen of sweat on his brow. "This is absurd. The woman is a witch. She has charmed you all." "And there is one final piece of testimony," Gideon said, his voice like steel. He nodded to the door. Hannah stepped forward. "Mrs. Cobb, if you please," Gideon prompted. Hannah's voice was rough but steady. "I saw Mr. Sinclair, Your Grace, the day he arrived. He brought a satchel into the west parlor. I saw him take out paper, like that, and a special bottle of ink. Later, I heard him and Lady Honora talking. She was saying that the little brown mouse would soon be out of her trap, and that with the Duchess disgraced, the Duke would be eager to sell at any price." The web was complete. The lies had been turned back upon their weavers. Lady Honora collapsed into her chair, her face a mask of horrified disbelief. Sinclair stood frozen, his face pale, his escape routes closing one by one. Mr. Jardine placed the forged letter down on the table with an air of finality. He looked at Sinclair and Lady Honora with cold contempt. "Forgery and conspiracy to defraud are serious crimes. I believe this is a matter for the courts." The public reckoning was complete. Constance's vindication was not whispered in corners, but declared before witnesses. She had not been rescued. She had presented her case, offered her evidence, and won.
She stood tall, her quiet competence having proven more powerful than all their wealth and cunning. She had not only saved herself, she had saved the soul of Kestrel Chase. After Sinclair and a sputtering, defeated Lady Honora had been escorted out, with Mr. Jardine promising swift legal action, a profound quiet fell upon the dining hall. The candles still flickered, the silver still gleamed, but the oppressive atmosphere had lifted, replaced by the clean, sharp air of truth. Gideon and Constance stood alone amidst the remnants of the battle. He looked at her, truly seeing the strength and grace she had displayed. She had faced down her accusers without a single tear, without a single plea for mercy. She had relied on her integrity, her memory, and the evidence she had so painstakingly preserved. "I came here to sell this house," Gideon said, his voice softer than she had ever heard it. "To erase it. I saw it as a prison of memory, a place of duty and death." He took a step closer, his eyes locked on hers. "I was wrong. It was not dead. Its heart was still beating. Because you were here. You kept it alive. You guarded its honor when I had abandoned my own." He stopped directly in front of her. The heat from the fireplace cast a warm glow on her face. "The contract for your share of the sale is already drawn up. You are a wealthy woman, Constance. You are free to go anywhere, to build any life you choose." She met his gaze, her own eyes searching his. She said nothing. "But I find," he continued, his voice dropping lower, becoming thick with an emotion he could no longer suppress, "that I do not wish you to go." He slowly went down on one knee. It was not the gesture of a conqueror, but of a supplicant. The Duke of Kestrel Chase, the hardened soldier, knelt before the quiet clerk he had married. "I am asking you to stay," he said, his voice raw with sincerity. "Not as a caretaker, not as a condition of a business arrangement, but as my wife, as the Duchess of Kestrel Chase in truth, not just in title, as my partner. He reached out and took her hands in his. They were steady. I am not offering to rescue you, Constance. I am asking you to choose this place, to choose me. The word hung in the air between them. Choose. After 5 years of having no choices at all, of enduring what was given to her, the power was finally, irrevocably hers. She looked down at him, this powerful, guarded man, now brought to his knees not by force, but by a quiet revelation. She saw the truth in his eyes, the profound, unadorned respect, the love. She thought of the cold chapel, the absent groom, the long, lonely years. She thought of the small, thriving garden, the loyalty of the tenants, the quiet satisfaction of her work. And she thought of this man, who had returned as a stranger and had, by watching her, learned to see the truth. Her answer was simple. It was plain. It was everything. Yes, she said. And then, for the first time with a soft, breathtaking intimacy, she spoke his name. Yes, Gideon. He rose, his hands still holding hers. He did not kiss her. Not yet. He simply stood there, holding on to her as if she were the anchor he had been searching for across all the battlefields of the world. In the quiet, fire-lit hall, 2 solitary people, bound first by law and then by necessity, had finally found their way to being bound by choice. Kestrel Chase was not going to be sold. It was going to be reborn. 1 year later, the great rose garden at Kestrel Chase was in full, riotous bloom. The dead wood had been cut away, the soil nourished, the trellises repaired. Under Constance's patient hand, what had been a thorny, neglected tangle was now a symphony of color and scent. The entire house seemed to breathe with it, the windows thrown open to the warm summer air, the scent of roses mingling with beeswax and baking bread. Laughter, a sound long absent from the stone halls, now echoed from the lawns. The children of the tenants were often at the great house, for the Duchess had started a small school for them in one of the unused parlors. Constance, it turned out, was as gifted a teacher as she was an accountant. She was walking through the rose garden now, a basket on her arm. She no longer wore the mended wool of a forgotten clerk. Her dress was of a simple but fine blue linen, the color of a summer sky. But her hands were the same, capable, gentle, often smudged with a bit of dirt from her gardening. Gideon came up behind her, placing his hands on her shoulders. He had changed too. The rigid, war-worn posture was gone, replaced by a relaxed strength. The coldness in his eyes had been supplanted by a deep, steady warmth, a warmth that was reserved entirely for her. "Mr. Jardine sends his compliments," he said, his lips brushing her hair. "He says the estate has never been more prosperous, and that he has never seen a more flagrant abuse of ducal privilege." Constance turned in his arms, a smile playing on her lips. "And what privilege is that?" "Inviting the magistrate's wife to tea 3 times in 1 week, simply to get her recipe for seed cake." Cello, a clear, happy sound. "It is a very good recipe, and it is for the harvest festival. It is a matter of estate importance." He smiled, pulling her closer. "Everything you do is a matter of estate importance." His gaze was full of the quiet awe that had never left him, the wonder of having discovered this treasure he had so carelessly set aside. Lady Honora was living in reduced circumstances in Bath, her stolen fortune largely confiscated to repay the estate. Sinclair had fled the country to avoid prosecution. Theirs was a distant, fading memory. The present was this: the sun, the scent of roses, the solid feel of his arms around her. He reached out and, with great care, snipped a perfect, deep crimson rose from the bush at the center of the garden, the very same bush that had been her sole comfort in the lonely years. He tucked it into her hair, his fingers gentle against her temple. "I remember the first time I saw this rose," he said quietly. "It was the only living thing in a world of grey stone. A promise." "A promise of what?" she whispered. "That even in the coldest, most neglected places," he said, his eyes holding hers, "life can find a way. That things worth having are worth fighting for. That a home is not a house, but the person who holds its heart." She leaned into him, her head resting on his chest, and they stood together in the fragrant, sunlit garden. The Duke had returned to sell the manor. Instead, he had found its mistress. He had come to liquidate a past and had, against all odds, discovered a future, blooming right where he had left it, waiting patiently to be seen. Thank you for listening to the story all the way to the end. Please tell us which city you're watching from and what the story made you feel. Don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss new stories.